Okay, here we go. Item number 6.
Sure. So councillors, we've come to the end of the financial year, so we've got the next 3 papers are just giving you as governance a bit of an oversight of the workload of our compliance monitoring teams. We've got 3 teams. We've got the team that Wayne leads, the team that Jack leads, and the team that Billy leads, just giving you an overall summary of our compliance workload over the last year. Patrick might have a few introductory comments, but then we'll just progress through those, and the team will give you a little bit of a snapshot of some examples of the sorts of things that we've been coming across and dealing with over the course of the past year. So over to you, Patrick.
Okay, thanks, Brent. That was just an introduction, and you've heard from Wayne previously. So, Wayne.
So morning all. Thanks, William. So the interesting thing, first off, I guess, is the fact that typically, we receive around 2,000 complaints a year. In the last financial year, that figure was short of 1,600. So that's interesting. Speculation, I guess, is potentially because of the economic decline. A lot of these people aren't doing as much activity as previously. That's one possible suggestion. Thank you, William. So I guess of those near 1,600 complaints, obviously all were responded to. 454 received a physical inspection, which is consistent with how we've operated previously. Generally speaking, a third of our complaints are triaged and require a physical inspection. The rest, the more minor incidents, the trivial matters, would receive a desktop approach with callbacks and the like. So further breaking that down, 193 breaches of regulation identified, and the outcomes for that, education advice given. So formal warnings, 26 formal warnings in the year, 8 infringement notices. As always, quite a few abatement notices, 46, a great tool that we have, and 17 incidents referred to our friends in the investigation team. Thank you. Thanks, William. So breaking it down to the top 5 categories, as always, odour features heavily, 309. Outdoor burnings as well is a frequent flyer. Discharges to water, 260. Sewage complaints to land, 92. And 83 with earthworks. And thanks again. So I just thought I'd delve into a couple of interesting cases. Obviously, we've previously spoken about the main case, but so one interesting case we've dealt with, we received, if you go to the next slide, please. So over a period of months, we received multiple reports of white discoloration from streams in the Donny Park area of, I guess you'd say, Fairfield. And this is a typical, on that previous slide, a typical photo of what it looks like. So the challenge that we were getting is a lot of notifications were coming in well after the event. People reporting online, things like that, but well after the event. And so the challenges with that is being able to get feet on the ground truth it, and actually capture samples to determine what the substance is. So we worked in with Hamilton City Council because obviously that's their stormwater assets that have been affected. But what was quite interesting, we utilised the media, particularly Facebook, with bringing this issue to the public's attention because we thought we might, flesh out someone responsible. Now, I have a little bit, as all good plans go. In the last 36 hours, I've had a complaint. So please disregard the last sentence. Unfortunately, Well, good news, bad news. Yes, bad news, we've got another complaint. Good news is we were able to get there on Sunday night and get a sample. So, yeah, watch this space, but disappointingly, it's still occurring. We have a lot of suspicions as to what it is. You know, whether it's somebody painting. We actually researched the times, and so there was a lot of complaints coming in sort of late afternoon. So we're wondering if people are washing up brushes, but unfortunately we haven't been able to progress it. So watch the space. Thank you.
It could be as small as someone washing their paintbrushes, could it?
Yeah, well, paint really disperses, you know, when you're particularly washing it out, and but you know, who knows? But hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it. We'll keep trying. Second case, please, William. And just give you an idea, this was an awful earthworks in the Tamahiri area. So the right-hand side is some good drone footage, really good tool that we have now. And if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, sorry about the small writing, but so in May this year, this was this event where neighbours have called us about their activities from their neighbours. We've attended, ascertained and scaled it. Over 1,300 square metres of works. And some of the works were in a significant natural area. And there was discharge of sediment into the stream, which in turn runs to the Waikato. Big issue here is the exposed earthworks, potential for ongoing sediment discharges. And so Waikato District Council had an interest for two reasons. Some of their land was actually affected, and they police, for want of a better word, the SNAs. So what did we do? We issued an abatement notice to cease all works and stabilise the soil and stop all the discharges. So it was pleasing to note that that worked, and specifically the fact that they you know, stabilised the area. That was good. Why did they do the works? Basically, the young children could ride their motorbikes down. So pretty frustrating. Also, what may be of interest is that they started with a small digger, that got stuck, went in with a bigger digger, that got stuck, and then had to get another digger to get them all out. So so the good news is that the owner is now obtaining retrospective consents and an engineer's assessment for the land stabilisation with Waikato District Council. And apart from the abatement notice, we issued 2 infringement notices for the unlawful earthworks and discharges to land that may enter water. So there was
is there further consequences for this landowner, or is that just a remedy situation?
Yeah, look, I guess in weighing up what we do, we're really pleased with their response and that the ongoing risk was addressed pretty promptly. So that played a big part of our decision-making process. Obviously, there was some punitive costs to them making good, but also the fact is that they're having to spend quite a bit of money now on engineers' reports and getting a consent. So we thought that pitching it with 2 infringement notices was the right way to. And that is my slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Wayne. And any questions from the field? Yes, Bruce.
Yeah, so what's being done to reinstate the SNA?
Yeah, and so unfortunately, I don't know, and I'm not aware of any feedback from the district council. So I think it's ongoing. Is all I can say at this point.
Bruce, are you keen to hear feedback on what the district council is doing in relation to the offending against its rules?
Yeah, absolutely, because the whole point of SNAs is that they're the cream of the cream, and you can just remove bits and not have a reinstatement process. This is serious stuff.
Yeah, so we'll pick that up and just make the inquiry to see if the district are doing anything. And if they are, we'll let you know. And if they're not, we'll let you know.
So just on that one, just thinking back to last term or term before where we started getting reports, clients or otherwise from district PAs with this waters infrastructure. This whole issue, not just SNAs, but in Waipa District Council, allocate a lot of those, what do they call them, EBLs, environmental benefit. People get subdivision rights by, but no one's checking on them. And there's been a case up our way where the farm changed hands and next thing the fence got broken and the cattle were just coming in and out of this thing, completely wrecking it. And I just don't think that a lot of district councils are set up to quite happy to dish out the EBLs and get both that comes from. They're not set up to monitor. I just wonder whether we should just, rather than just get a report, haven't they done anything, just have a little bit of a think about it, Brent, as to what we can do as an organisation to perhaps get the district councils to step up and own their responsibilities in these spaces. Because as I said, I just don't think they've really thought through what their obligations are with both SNAs. Well, not so much SNAs, but these environmental benefit lots.
Patrick, a few years ago, there was a forum that we kind of led trying to help the territorial authorities work together to lift their game in this space. Is there still interest from the territorials in that forum?
No, not really, Brent. As you know, we've got 11 territorial authorities. They have vastly varying resources and priorities, I suppose. Wayne has our focus in the last couple of years, driven by Wayne, is helping them respond to wastewater incidents, so that if there's a wastewater spill of some sort, is that they understand what the priority should be environmentally. So there's quite a bit of time and effort's been gone into that, but it hasn't been, to my knowledge, it hasn't. And we provide training actually for when we do our CME training. We open that up to our territorial authorities to come along and get better at the compliance monitoring enforcement stuff themselves. That's still available, but I would think it's probably limited to that. Unless anyone can think of other examples.
I mean, to my knowledge, just doing a rough desktop in my head, there's probably at least 25 of those EBLs have been created in Whitehall, where I am, in the last 5 years, And if you extrapolate that out of the district, literally hundreds of them have been created. If no one's keeping an eye on them and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to do, it's a bit of a joke, Anyway, I appreciate no answer right now, but something I think we should think about.
Yeah, so I'm presuming our forum for that will be submissions on annual plans and long-term plans to territorial authorities, asking that they put resources into the space so that they have staff resource to be able to do the exact things that you're describing. I think is what Patrick's politely alluding to, is that this council has resourced staff in the compliance monitoring enforcement space, and that same level of resourcing isn't necessarily in place in some of the territorials in the region.
I just wondered whether we've shared the photos with District Council, because I mean, they're quite graphic photos and they show, it's quite a useful resource if you could share it so someone there can do a.
What I can say is that the District Council attended and definitely took photos and yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Wayne, that wraps you up, does it? Oh, sorry, one last one, Robbie.
Go back to the Milky Water one, the previous one. And just an observation, as I've driven around Hamilton City quite a bit in my 9 months I've been in council now. A lot of section developments, especially with this wet weather, seem to be all full of water all the time. And you're sure it's actually paint and not it's actually just soil contamination being pumped off sort of those sort of sites? Because that would cause milky water pretty quickly, what I've seen.
Yeah, look, we're not, obviously the assumption is made that it could be paint. And now that we've got a sample, which I think generally takes about a week, up to a week, that'll hopefully give us a bit of steer.
But yeah, I was just horrified how many sections when they were doing developments were underwater. around the city. And so just the containment of that water being pumped off a site, how is that managed on a section side around Hamilton?
Yeah, just check, it would be, I suppose, when we're responding to something like that, Wayne would be looking at what's happening in that particular catchment. So Donny Park, I think, is reasonably established. I'm not sure if there is a lot of development, particular, where as opposed to your more, you know.
In Fairfield, there was 3 just recently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Wayne and Patrick. I'll move to receive the report. Do I have a seconder? Robbie, thank you. And then we'll move on to the next item, number 9 on the running sheet. Evan, welcome. And carried, yes, that's right, thank you. All in favour? Opposed? Carried, thank you. Right, back to Evan.
Kia ora tātou.
Rural compliance.
Yes, I look after the rural compliance team, and the report you've received just relates to our compliance monitoring and enforcement sort of stats or summary for the last financial year. Been a really busy year for our team with a few changes, and the report just covers off some of the figures and stuff. So I prepared a short presentation. Go through that. Shift up a bit closer. I can't actually. So we did 571 dairy effluent monitoring inspections throughout the course of the year. Out of those inspections, 340 of those sites risk. Under that just shows our level of compliance. I guess the significant figures there were 68% sites there were compliance with the regulations and 6% significant. We issued 42 abatement notices, a large number of form notices, ordered 12 dairy effluent team for further follow-up, and 55 of those times breaches. No.
Can you go back one slide, sorry? You inspected 571. Those 342 were considered high risk, but it doesn't mean that they were necessarily non-compliant, is what you
No, yeah. They'd have been identified as farms that
and so of all those ones that are high risk, some may have had perfect structure. It's just high risk of something went wrong.
That's correct. Yeah. And so that high risk list is down below. So farms that and fully compliant have been for farms we found that onto that list.
Okay, and the 571 out of the 4,500 odd we've got, that was that 571 but influenced by previous information you've had, or was it the 571 random?
I guess a big number related to high risk, and then others, there were other, have a strategy around how we do our dairy effluent compliance, and they feature for other reasons. They might not have been monitored for some years, or they just came up in a particular area that we were monitoring, or we'd had a complaint about them.
That's still quite high then, isn't it?
Quite, sorry.
It's still quite high then, at 341 out of.
Yeah. We target the high risk farms to get around more often, for obvious reason, and the rest are ones that we have a strategy around how we get to those farms. Yeah.
Thank you.
Next slide. So this just shows in a bit more detail how those figures are situated. I guess the good news story for our dairy monitoring is 68% of our farms have been fully compliant. And then we use a range of enforcement outcomes in terms of dealing with that. A lot of our work involves no further enforcement action, and that's working with the farm to become compliant or addressing high risk issues, and they follow up with us. Yep, thank you. Also, a significant part of our work is monitoring forestry activities. So over the past financial year, 221 notifications came through to us for forestry activities, 141 active forestry sites. And there's a breakdown there of what they relate to. So a significant number of those notifications relate to earthworks, harvest and harvesting. We issued 6 abatement notices, 7 formal warnings. We don't generally issue infringement notices in relation to forestry activities. And 2 files in that financial year went through to Greg's team. No further enforcement. We use quite a lot of education and follow-up for forestry sites because they're an in-process operation. Next one. This just breaks that down into a little bit of detail relating where the sort of notifications sit and the enforcement outcomes.
Just a question on that. With what's happened down in Gisborne, are the rules changing and will that impact what we do here?
No, so the NES itself is being reviewed, I understand, but that relates more to the carbon forestry stuff, but it doesn't impact on how we're the regulations here. There is some work that's gone down in those areas, sort of, I think they're reviewing what happened down there and potentially there'll be some rules, some changes coming.
Right.
Yeah, but
Right.
Nothing that's been highlighted to us as yet.
And do we have, with the storms we've had, have we had much debris flow through rivers?
No, we haven't, not in relation to woody debris. There's been a lot of sediment on hill country, pastoral and some of the forestry blocks, but no, we didn't have really significant slash or woody debris events.
They did lose an awful lot of trees though, didn't they?
Yeah, a lot of the wind blowing or the storm damage was around the Taupo region where the land's pretty flat. And we lost some in the Coromandel, but they didn't impact on waterways the same way as they did in other parts of it.
Ross, did you want? Yeah, Joe, just following on from Stu's comment. So I know that the figures are probably not directly comparable with previous years, but can you give us a sense of these numbers compared to previous years?
Notifications a year before were between 300 and 400, so we had a higher number of notifications. They fluctuates quite a bit in terms of log price, and so we've noticed a real downturn in notifications in the second part of the financial year as the log price crashed.
Is that because of harvesting?
Yeah, so log price goes down in smaller operations. There's not the margins in it, and so they tend to shut the gates for a while. The corporates carry on; they have a different structure. Enforcement outcomes. There's a increased focus now that we've got a team approach to forestry, more of a team approach, a little bit more resourcing, and so we're just trying to be really consistent in how we deal with the non-compliance we find compared to other industries, earthworks, developments going on, and we have a focus on using enforcement tools to correct behaviour.
And the dairying effluent monitoring?
Yeah. Yeah, similar to previous years. It's just number of inspections we do, which sort of relates to the resource we're finding. We're putting more emphasis, we're focusing on find non-compliance, being able to really fully deal with it and resolve it before we move on. So potentially doing less inspections, but we're hoping that the environment outcomes are being improved, and that's by not taking our foot off the throttle in relation to non-compliance that we're finding, and that takes some time to get a good outcome. Not targeted. I guess you can use that's a bit of a motive word. Targeting. We have a high risk number of farms, which we certainly focus on, and we focus on getting around as many as we can. Sometimes we get complaints from farmers that haven't seen the regional council in fire, so it's important that we get in front.
Oh, Patrick.
So it just in response to the, I suppose the people resourcing. So the rural compliance team, yes, as Billy's saying, is focusing at the moment on the dairy effluent side of things and the forestry. Yeah, yes, but that's being done with the same resources. So Billy says, we're building up the expertise and the people resource to deal with the forestry issues, is that's less people and resource available to focus on the dairy side of things. So we've got to balance that. And then, of course, with farm plans coming online and all of the other all of those regulations that sit in a rural context will all sit ultimately with Billy's team to manage our CME response to all of that. So what you might see over time is a bit of fluctuation in our with the same people resource, we're going to be doing more things. So we're going to have to juggle and reprioritize across those various activities in the rural.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 371, is that a greater number than in previous years or smaller?
Smaller number.
So the practice is getting better? The
Probably.
number's getting smaller.
Yeah, then we've redefined how we look at it. So we've tried to look at the most high risk activities or management on farms, and rather than the high risk register when I came into the team was about 1,300, and that really related to the the trigger points they were looking at to put it on the high risk register. And so so that we can concentrate our resource better on the ones that really need it, we redefined really closely at that. And so there's less farms around that 400 we started with. It's less after the last monitoring year. But focus of our team is looking at, for example, dairy effluent ponds, some of the pond systems that need work are not on that list as high risk, but they're certainly identified as a risk and something that we need to address. And so we have a project to look at that. That's a focus of our compliance year.
What's the total number of dairy farms in the Waikato?
3,918, which includes about 100 goat farm, sheep milk farm.
So
And it fluctuates a little bit with farms combining and dropping off. But that's our
you're talking
accurate
about 9%. That number's. No, I understand, but it's relatively,
Chair, I was just wondering, we did have Billy did have a couple of brief case studies to speak to, but in the interest of time, we're happy to forego those for another time if that's helpful.
Yep, that's probably.
Well, I find them useful. I find them they're
Okay.
more interesting than the stats. So,
All right.
yeah.
Okay, good.
Thanks, William. So this photograph here, like I said, we're looking at a focus on earth and effluent storage ponds in our region. As far accurate as the records are, there's around 1,700 ponds that are earth in-ground ponds. On this farm, the second pond was overflowing and the farmer had gone under the roads for a culvert and he dug a channel to channel it into a drain which led down to a stream. Both ponds are in ground and aren't engineered constructed ponds. Yep. This was 3 or 4 weeks later, the same pond, so it just gives an idea of the type of ponds. So it has open sort of friable bedders on the pond, and then an open drain from the dairy shed to the effluent pond. Thank you. Same farm, 3 further hole in the ground ponds. So there's a feed pad there, which is potentially decades old. It's never had an effluent system installed. There's a farm drain at the bottom of it, which the effluent's directed into to the drainage system. And sort of in the middle of the photo, there's an old quarry loading ramp where they push the solids onto, and then they've just dug a series of holes and channels to contain the effluent, none of which would meet our sealing standards. Thank you. A couple of photos here. This shows a really well-engineered forestry landing on a really challenging site in the Awakino area. And it just shows the slope failure resulting from Cyclone Gabriel. I think the point here with this photo is there was a slope failure, but they had benched it correctly, and so the slope failure was caught up in slash at the bottom, and in the bottom left of the photo is just lower slope that came away. The weight of trees on it coming over pulled it down rather than the landing itself failing. Down around Taupō, so New Zealand forest managers manage a couple of big forests there for iwi, 6,800 hectares of windthrow in their forests following Hale and Gabriel. They've currently got 36 crews involved in salvage operations. They have a relatively short window to salvage wood, and at the moment 200 truckloads of logs are leaving their forests daily.
Just one last question for Patrick. In here, you've talked about the focus of the team needs to expand. You've got a senior compliance officer forestry and a new one for rural position. What you're saying is the team itself is not expanding, you're just expanding what you do.
From our last LTP, we did one resource available that we've placed in Billy's team, and that's to take a more sort of senior overarching to sort of try and deal with all of the new farm-related regulations. What's our strategies? How do we develop strategies for dealing with that? So that's someone to support Billy with that. We're currently recruiting for that, so I beg your pardon, that is an additional resource. But other than that, the team is fixed and actually remains fixed for the foreseeable future to deal with these two areas and all of the other emerging areas. So
There's not a large bid coming for the LTP.
Zero.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Anything else, Brent?
I was just going to add to what Patrick's saying there, that central government is bringing out a lot of rules. We've got the intensive winter grazing regulations, we've got the synthetic nitrogen regulations, there's the stock exclusion regulations, let alone the farm planning stuff that's coming through, and the plantation forestry work that the team are already picking up. So yeah, there's quite a bit of stuff that comes through for this team, and so there's quite a bit of work that they do about prioritising where they're going to get the best best bang for the buck, really. And so it's the great work that Billy and his team have been doing, trying to make sure that we focus on the really sharp end stuff. And then every now and again we'll get something like a Rāwhiti pork, which is becomes a directorate-wide response. You know, so there's been people directorate that area, which does mean that sometimes we have to drop off some other things which are not quite as high a priority at the time. So it's a bit of and that can change tomorrow. Something can come in tomorrow. So Patrick and Wayne and Billy and Jack from Amy's team constantly working together about making sure we've got the resources going to where is the highest priority. But recognise that we have to do the best we can with the resources that we've got, because it's not an endless supply of resources. So they do a great job. Well done, team.
Thank you. Well done. Last one, Stu.
I've said this before, but I just want to say it again. It does worry me that, as you've just outlined, Brent, the playing field's really changing in terms of, and I'm just a bit nervous that not starting to address that with this next annual plan, or was an LTP, I forget now. We run the risk of, to do things properly in 3 years' time, having a really big spike. I appreciate you've explained to me, Brent, the way we're doing on this, but I still suspect there's going to be a higher expectation from the general public. Going to be dealing with a lot more stuff than we're dealing with now, you know. And I just what I want to avoid being is that down the track, which I think risk of doing. Yeah.
Good point. Thank you.
Oh, I agree. I think this is one of the things we get account for more so than biodiversity or other things. So yeah, where I would spend some money.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Evan. You've done there. And can I have a mover, please, to receive the report? Ian, would you like to receive the report? And I'll second it. All in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, next up we have consent monitoring. Jack, Gareth and Amy. Hello. Hello and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morena Koto. I'm just going to start with a quick overview of the section, which is a kind of a nice link actually between the conversation that's just been had and then into Jack's presentation about compliance monitoring over the year. And then following Jack discussing that, I can give you an update on consenting, and if you're interested, some of the day one provisions of the new Natural and Built Environments Act, which we expect to be a live week today. So is there a presentation? Yep, thank you. So just wanted to give you a quick overview that we've just completed our first year in a new structure. So a very, very brief overview of what those changes were and how it's impacted the section's delivery in the previous financial year. So previously, and for many, many years, the structure of the consenting, broader consenting team was in specialised teams. And so we had 6 teams, but they all had people that did consenting and monitoring within those teams, and they had specific areas of focus, so land development, industry, infrastructure, that kind of thing. And we had 50 staff at that time. And so when I changed it at the beginning of last financial year, if you could go to the next slide, please, I decided to actually separate out the consenting and the monitoring functions. And primary reason for that was it felt like both of those functions were getting so complex that it was difficult for people to be really well across both. And so the idea was that they would then specialise into either consenting or monitoring. So over that time, we also have increased in our FTE, and in part that's thank you to the previous EPC committee, because they gave us 3 additional consent monitoring staff last term, which was fantastic. And we also brought in another business support person from a different team in Rudd. As well as that, we created a support team, which primarily works with the consenting people, and the idea of them is to try and take some of the additional burden of the consenting staff because they're so busy and have such high workloads. One of the challenges we have had this year, though, is you'll see the number there is 54 staff. We've actually had 35 staff changes over the last year, and so with that ongoing recruitment, having to train people up, it has put quite a strain on the existing staff. Next, thank you. So really the key changes that were made, and I think that have actually helped improve the business, is we have now a principal advisor who works for me, and her focus is really working on the business and delivering improvements, helping people be more efficient in the way that they work, and making sure that we're across all of the change that's coming to us from central government. Also created a contract management role, and really that was just to take control back in a way. I felt like some of our consultants, especially that were processing consents on our behalf, they were running the processes and we weren't managing them as well as we probably could have. So now we're holding them to account, and we're going to bring in a whole new way of managing them. And certainly with this restructure, one of the other changes that's happened is that we've brought quite a lot of the monitoring back in-house, and so it's not being done by contractors, it's now being done by staff, and so we have better oversight of that. As well as that, starting to get a bit of a plan in place for how we're going to manage the Plans Change 1 consents when they come our way, whenever that might be, and also bringing in a fixed term role just to really look at processing all of that backlog of the water take applications. So those are just a few of the changes that we've made, and now it's a good way to pass over to Jack to now give an overview on how that's kind of permeated through the monitoring function of the team.
The switch from more staff and stronger monitoring of contractors, has that resulted in savings of money?
So the work that the monitoring contractors were doing was being on charged to the consent holders. So I guess the benefit to the consent holder is that our hourly rates are lower than the contractor's hourly rates. So they have certainly seen the benefit. I probably would have reduced some of the cost to us because there is a bit of an element of having to manage those people and make sure they're doing the right thing, but I wouldn't say it was significant.
So it just gives you more direct.
Yeah, and it's a good development opportunity for our people as well. They get to do the more interesting work.
Cool. Morning, everyone. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is the current setup of our monitoring teams. When we presented to you earlier at the last EPC, we had 3 teams. One of our team leaders moved on and we had a chance to take another look at how our teams are set up, and what we've settled on is a 2-team system, which has a lot more, I guess, interoperability. So we share a lot more of the expertise and are working across teams, so much less siloed. And a much better system. And those two, so it's a rough breakdown of what the 2 teams do, but there's obviously projects we work on together and separately, and then officers working across those specialties as well. But that just gives you an idea of the range of stuff that our teams have to be across. Slide, please. Next slide, please. This is a breakdown of our consents. So we've got around 2,500 consented sites across the region, and around 12,500 resource consents in total. Not all of them require monitoring every year, and this is just a demonstration of how it breaks down by industry type. We've got around, the bulk of them are probably 600 water takes, another 500 structures, and those are probably, they make up 1,000 sites that don't require a huge amount of monitoring or are monitored remotely using telemetry and exception monitoring and things like that. And then as we get down further, we've got smaller categories, but still quite a few sites, especially in the industry, our mines and quarries, and our 3 water consents. And that's where we spend a lot of our resource and time. Next slide, please. So every year, similar to Evan and the rural team and their high-risk sites, our monitoring teams identify the highest priority sites each year. And our goal set under the long-term plan is to monitor 100% of those. So we select our sites on a risk-based process, looking at a number of factors. So it could be previous non-compliance, public interest, industry awareness and industry behavior and things like that, to really focus our resource. Last year, we identified 356 of those, and we monitored every single one of them, not necessarily with a site visit. It could be a desktop audit, data assessment, a site inspection, or some other method of assessing their general compliance. The graph on your left shows a breakdown of compliance. So green being fully compliant, yellow, low risk, generally of a technical nature. Moderate is, orange is moderate non-compliance, so a bit more serious, potentially some adverse environmental effects there, and red being significant. And then the 3 bars are so up top are our focus areas. Those are our highest priority ones. And then we have other sites that we identify. So FA2 being focus area 2. Those are the ones that we endeavour to monitor next if we have the resource all the time. And then we have a number of them, FAX, which is everything else that we tend to be a bit efficient in our work planning. If we're going to one of these sites we have to monitor, we'll pick up a number of sites around that area to reduce cost to the consent holder and just make our monitoring process a bit more efficient, make the most of our resources. And you can see we pick up a fair number of them. So another 350 sites that we didn't anticipate monitoring in that given year. And that's a good improvement on previous years as well. So around about 700 this year is an increase from 500 sites monitored last year. So that new structure, the dedicated monitoring resource, has really bore some fruit for us this year, and being able to get around and monitor. Next, please. So this is another way to look at it. Regimes is our our internal data speak for sites and authorizations for resource consents. And again, that compliance breakdown. So when we're assessing a site, we'll look at a number of resource consents. It may have 1, may have 10, may have 20, and we'll look at the number of consents on that site that require monitoring in that year. And then the site compliance comes off your worst performing consent. So if you're perfect with all your consents except for 1, then that's going to affect your site grading. So when we look at our resource consents, you can see a much better spread, and there's higher levels of compliance. So it's an important metric to take into account when we're looking at it. Yes. Enforcement actions as well. So this is another area where we've been able to spend more time on those problem sites, taking appropriate enforcement and stepping through our enforcement policy to make sure that we're holding these sites to account and moving them in the right direction towards compliance. A big chunk of our work is around formal warnings, so that's the blue, and the graph on the left is just the different sections or offences that we've issued them for. So the bulk of them are section 15, which is discharge of contaminants, and then section 14, the next one is water take offences, and then we've got a number of other ones. So breach of abatement notices, where we're holding people to account for not following those notices and stepping up the pressure on them, and then a number around coastal and land use there as well. Next slide, please. And then importantly for us, it's looking at how we're going over the long term. So we've got really, really good data with all our compliance monitoring work over the last 4 or 5 years. So this shows the percentage of non-compliance, yellow being low risk, orange moderate, and red significant over time, and it's reducing, which is a really good trend and something that we're wanting to continue to do. You'll see we're for the last 3 years, we've been pretty steady with the moderate non-compliance, and that's a big focus for us, is getting that down. So that's either moving them towards compliance or just of a technical nature and away from any kind of environmental effects. But we've seen really good progress this year, getting people from that low risk bar into full compliance, and also reducing the number of significant non-compliant sites that we're having, which there are major sites, big events, and huge impacts. Agrees, example. The purple bar is another important metric that we keep track of. So the little line wiggling along the bottom, that is our long-term non-compliance. So we look at sites that are non-compliant year after year after year. And what we're trying to do is get that down as close to 0 as we can. We don't want sites that are in repeat non-compliance. And we've seen a really good decrease this year. That additional resource and focus, we've been able to engage with our consent holders, explain what's required of them, and really support them through that process towards compliance. And that's reduced quite a bit the number that we've got on our books, and something we hope to continue into the next year. And yeah, these are just some of the standout stats and achievements from our team this year. So more sites monitored, more consents monitored. We've seen that big increase in formal enforcement actions. So where we're finding non-compliance, we're dealing with it appropriately. We've seen that reduction in significant non-compliant sites and repeat non-compliance. So these are the kind of metrics that we focus on. And then on the people and team side, as Amy said, 35 new staff. For us, that's been around about 18 positions, 17 positions, so quite a few. About a third of those have been internal, so bringing that work off external contractors, we're able to develop our staff. They get more experience and more complex work, and we're able to develop them into really important positions within our team. And then bringing in some new faces from different backgrounds, different walks of life as well. So recruitment's been reasonably challenging on this scale. So we've had some interesting officers join us from different backgrounds, which has added a really good, I guess, different way of doing things and different way of seeing things, and we're much more reflective of the wider community that we regulate, I think. That was all I had. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jack. Any questions from the floor? No? Good as gold, well done. Good result, good story, so thank you very much. And I'll move to receive the report. Seconded, Bruce, thank you. All in favour? Opposed? Carried, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Amy, I suppose you'll stay right there.
I am.
Regional consent update.
Yes, so
Thanks.
don't have a presentation for this one, and we'll just take the report as read, but just walk you through some highlights and a couple of changes as well, actually. So looking at firstly at the number of consent applications, we said 820. Just to highlight to you that that's actually less that we've been tracking down for the last few years in terms of numbers of applications received and granted. But because of the changing regulatory framework that we are working in, less doesn't mean that we can get through them more quickly, because actually it's a much more complex environment. And so we find that they're taking a lot longer than they previously were. So good to hear that they're tracking down, and hopefully with the new act coming in, once we move into that framework, the idea is that there'll be less consents again. So another change to the report is that it said that there were 14 applications over time. That's actually gone up to 19, but we still stayed within the 95% target for the year. And from a financial perspective, the cost to council was around about $3,000, so not excessive. Then moving through to the appeals section, section 8, there's updates on some of these as well. So the Gleeson's Quarry appeal now has a date for mediation, and that is the 31st of August. So we've got one of our principal planners and legal counsel going to attend that. In terms of the Waste Management NZ in Te Rauhia, still haven't received a decision from Judge Kirkpatrick, but we're expecting that should be imminent, hopefully in the next 3 to 4 weeks, because where the court hearing was held over 2 sessions within May, so that was quite some time ago now. And then with the Buffalo Beach seawall, I feel like I'm talking about the same ones each time. These things take a while to resolve. We have actually, so we were supposed to get some information back to the court on the 4th of August. On the 3rd of August, the applicant decided to get a new legal counsel. So that meant that everything has been delayed once more. So we have a new due date to get what we're hoping will be agreed conditions and agreed land covenants on the properties on the 31st of August. So we've actually had some words from the Environment Court judge saying that he thinks it's taking a little bit too long and would like to get it resolved. And I absolutely mirror his feeling on that one, but I feel like we're going to get there pretty soon. So that's really good. And then finally, just to highlight about the fast track consenting work. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but that act was repealed about a month ago, 8th of July. Throughout the time of the COVID Recovery Fast Track Act, there were 5 consents granted in our region. We have 2 currently before the EPA, which are solar farms, one in Rangariri and one in Wairinga. They're quite close to each other, and then 4 more that have been accepted for fast tracking, but the applications haven't been lodged with the EPA yet. And noteworthy actually that there's a very similar process proposed for the new Natural and Built Environments Act. So some other things that are coming at us is this Friday, our regional coastal plan is being notified, which means there are a whole bunch of rules that we will have to assess new activities under the existing framework and the new framework. So that's going to add another layer of complexity. It'll impact our consenting staff, but also our monitoring staff, because if someone wants to do something that's a permitted activity under the existing plan, they will also have to meet all of the permitted activity standards in the new plan for it to be a PA. So we're just working through what that might look like for staff. As well as that, and I've talked about the MBA a couple of times now, so it's having its 3rd reading today. so this is the last opportunity for changes to be made to that Act. Then we are anticipating that it'll be given royal assent on Monday, which means it's essentially live Tuesday next week. And there are some immediate day one changes that will impact on our team. It also impacts on Patrick's team as well, of course, everything that we do. But so, yeah, the first one was that fast tracking process, very similar to what it was under the COVID Recovery Act. But they're giving, so that will be active from day one. They are limiting it to certain activities, which generally infrastructure related. So it's not quite as all-encompassing as the COVID Act was, and also just giving a bit more time for these processes to happen. In terms of consenting, for the majority of our work, there won't be any change until we have the new plan under the new Act. And so that obviously is going to be quite a few years away. So it won't have an immediate impact on everything that we do. But one of the important changes that will be implemented from day one, there'll be a new maximum duration for freshwater takes. And so we've been given the instruction that a consent it can only be granted for a duration not exceeding 5 years after the first plan is given legal effect. So that is the day that the decisions version is notified, plus 10 days, plus 5 years. So at this point in time, we'll be granting these consents, and we're just having to work out exactly how we can do that and give the consent holder certainty on how long they can actually have their resource consent for. So working through that at the moment, as are all of the other regional councils, and working quite closely to sort of support each other and understand what that means. Again, there are some exemptions, and that's for big developments like hydro schemes. So they would be exempt from those that limited duration. The other thing that is changing for consenting, and it'll be from day one, is that we will be able to take compliance history into account when processing consent applications. So that's something we haven't been able to do before. And as well as that, we will now have the ability to either cancel or revoke resource consents for repeat poor offenders. So, significant offenders, people that really aren't doing what they should do, we can actually cancel their consent. So we have a little bit more power as of next Tuesday than what we have today. There are obviously a whole bunch more changes. Haven't quite got my head around all of it yet, but those are the key ones relating to the work that my section does. I thought might be of interest to you. Any questions on that?
Yes, thank you, Stu. Where you go?
I just can't help but think of the item we had this morning. But that only applies to consented activities, not PA, which is quite frustrating in some respects when people are saying, hey, let's make it a PA, but we'll do all this other stuff to demonstrate. But it certainly ties our hands in other.
Actually, another good provision is that they're introducing cost recovery for permitted activity monitoring.
Yeah, good.
And complaint response, I think it is an investigation or prosecutions, which we haven't had previously. And so that's going to put much more of a user pays framework as well, which will be good for us.
Actually, just one thing too, this is a bit general, but we had the forestry stuff before, but I've had the odd grumble from some forestry operators about when our staff have had to drive for Moko, for example. It's obviously quite a bit of time and mileage involved, which is unavoidable. But obviously there are often opportunities to try and find 3 or 4 jobs in one part of the world. I assume we do that where practical, do we? A bit different if you're responding to a complaint, but as part of general monitoring of forestry stuff, I assume we make an effort to.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've got a team out today who are up in the Coromandel, and they've stacked up a few sites to visit for exactly that purpose.
Cool.
Yep.
Our section does the same thing, and the other thing is that we only charge 1 hour maximum of travel time, and so if we have to travel 4 hours, we'll only be charged that to that.
But just to add to that, the teams apply the principle about who should pick up that bill, and so we have, as Amy said, generally try to spread work out. So that can be spread around. But there are times when we have to attend things because of that party's non-compliance. We have to go because of their action. Then the question then becomes, who should pay for that? Should the ratepayer pay for that, or should the party pay because we've had to go there because of their poor compliance? And so some judgment is applied at times around making sure that the right party is paying for the reason that we're there. Yeah,
That's entirely fair. And you know, people, the land's cheaper in Morco for a reason, you know, and so you hear high cost range of difference. So you can't go penalising people that are living close to civilization as well. But I absolutely acknowledge it's a balance, and sounds like you've got.
Amy, you didn't mention the section around the changing status of the water take queue. So remember previously, the committee has asked us to report regularly on what the current state of allocation is. The report that came to you last time said that there was allocation available in all parts of the Waikato system, apart from the main STEM system. And I think Amy reported that that can change overnight. An application can come in, and this report just gives an update that such an application has been received, and so now we're at allocation at Oka Falls, correct? So it's just an example of things can change very quickly. An application can come in, and so now we have like a mini queue now for people to take water above Oka Falls, now at full allocation or full subscription for water at just another good reason why to keep it on this agenda, so that you keep having visibility of how that can change from month to month.
Bruce.
Yeah, thank you. Amy, the Rotorua Greenway, can you just tell us a bit more about that? Is that the bit that's going to be running all the way from Waipakariki right over to the lake, Rotorua? Is it the stormwater disposal system? Or?
Yes, when you say it like that, that rings a bell. Yes, it's the stormwater disposal system. So, and there's an arterial route as part of that application as well. So part of their application to the EPA will be seeking authorisation for both of them. We haven't seen the detail of the application.
Is that the city council that's lining up for this? Or?
No, it's the developer. Actually, I think they are in partnership with the city council as well.
So the arterial route, is that running alongside the Greenway? Is that?
As I say, I haven't seen the detail. Until they actually lodge their application with the EPA, okay, we won't know exactly what it is that they're seeking to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, it was just to pick up on that Hooker Falls thing now, zero. Presumably in future, under the new rules, the maximum duration for water takes, apart from 30 or 50 years for hydro?
It won't be 35 years. It'll be probably like 10 to 15 years.
So will that be the ones who've currently got applications, or do they just get in ahead of that?
It'll be the ones that are lodged post Tuesday next week. So the ones that are currently in play, they are still processed under the RMA provisions. The MBEA isn't, and that's when these first day kick off.
Because there was a lot of concern, a lot of people, farmers and things like that, concerned about 10-year takes was allow much development opportunity if that, and also for small, but that's what they've stuck with.
Yes, although the hydro will be exempt.
Not small hydro though.
It's not that specific in the guidance that I've been given. It just says, for example, hydroelectric generation schemes. It doesn't say big or small.
And the other thing was just to look at the solar farms. That's new applications coming. So,
yes, solar farm consenting has been very popular through the fast track route, and I'm not aware of anywhere in the country that have been declined.
yeah, presumably they're on flat land close to.
Generally they're proposing to, for example, graze sheep around panels, and so they're still being utilised for other land uses. So for the two, I think it was the Rangariri and Wairinga, the stage that that's at is the EPA have been in touch with us asking, and the Waikato District Council actually asking for recommendations for commissioners to sit on the panel. So we've given those the last few days, and that means that they'll be very close to hearing the applications. We anticipate probably September.
Right. So, I mean, it's obviously going to be a land use changes occurring in our region.
Yes, and so they'll have to consider things like the MPS on highly productive soils. That means that kind of stuff. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll close that there. Thank you, Amy,
Thank you.
for your report. And could I have someone move the receipt of the report, please? Thank you, Robbie. I'll second it. All in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 12, farm plan implementation. Tracy, hi.
Hi, nice to see you all. I take the report as being read. So a lot has happened since I last gave you an update. Not sure how on top of things you are, but I'm going to tell you what our team's been up to. So I have got a presentation. Yeah. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just for some background, and I'll do this quickly because I know I've brought it up before. Freshwater farm plan regulations were introduced by the government, where all farmers with more than 20 hectares of land in arable or pasture and more than 5 hectares in horticulture need to have a farm plan. And we were chosen along with Southland to be one of the regions where the regulations would be turned on first. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So since we last talked in May, the Freshwater Farm Plan regulations was gazetted on the 6th of June 2023 and they took effect on the 1st of August 2023. So not a lot of time for us to get ready. I'm not sure if you remember from my last presentation, but originally a landowner was going to have 12 months from when their part of the region was turned on to when they had to submit a farm plan. And we proposed that that move to 18 months. And that has been accepted, and that is what is part of the regulation. So, you know, a win for the landowner. Our rollout plan that we proposed was also accepted. And so the Waipā FMU is our first sub-region to go live. Next slide, please. So the team have been really, really busy, working really hard to develop the systems that are needed to support the rollout. So one of the things we've been working on is we need to have certifiers, farmers to submit their farm plan to. Now we have been working with Assure Quality. They are the company which are developing the national training. But then if we want certifiers to be in this region, there are things that we want them to know because our context is quite, you know, unique compared with Southland or Northland. And so the team has been developing a regional training. What does this mean? The team have sat down and thought about what are the things that we want certifiers to know about our region when they're going out to landowners. The other thing we've thought about is it's not just the certifier that's really important in the system. It's the people that are going to actually create these plans. So some farmers might do it themselves, other farmers might get a consultant to help them. And so this training that we're developing is also targeted to them. We have been working closely with our iwi partners to develop the CCCV, so catchment, context, challenges and values. And we have been focusing on the Waipā catchment for this. So we have gone out and we have had hui with Waikato, Tainui, Te Nehinui, Rokawa, to talk them through the system, to identify areas where they can provide input. And we've also provided them with a draft version of the CCCV for their feedback. What are the things that are important to them that they would like added to the document? As we move into the other regions, we will be using the same process. I guess the other thing we've done is, so we can create training and we can create CCCV and we can think it's great, but actually, what about the people that need to use it? So we're doing extensive user testing to make sure it makes sense to the people that need it to make sense to. Next slide, please. I've also mentioned a lovely acronym called INFDP, which is an Integrated National Farm Data Platform. where the information from the farm plans is going to go into. Now, this is something that the certifier will engage with, not the farmer. But it is a tool that isn't going to be ready until 2025. So our team are working closely with the developers. But in the meantime, a bridge has been created. So the bridge is for those councils which are going first, and the INFDP isn't going to be available. The other thing is, we hear this a lot from landowners. Why do we have to enter information, 2 or 3 times? And we're hearing that from our industry partners as well. And so we're working closely with the likes of Fonterra and others to work out what an efficient way is to get information talking to one another in a secure way. And they are really, really keen for this to happen. And so conversations are ongoing. Next slide, please. Right, so I've talked about a lot that there's lots of other organisations in the region who are also supporting landowners. And so what's our role in it? Our engagement team now is fully complemented. And so one of the things that that team is doing is we're connecting with our industry stakeholders to make sure that there's consistent messaging and it's pitched appropriately. We know that at the moment farmers have a lot on their plate. It's a busy time of year. For the dairy sector, the payout's gone down, the weather, all these other rules and regulations. And we want to make sure that we are doing what we can to support, not create headaches. The other thing that we've really heard from our sector is they want to be part. They want to co-develop with us what our engagement and what our comms looks like. And so the team has been out connecting with the hort sector, the dairy sector and the dry stock sector around how can we tailor our messaging and support to meet the unique challenges that those sectors are facing. We're also putting out a monthly newsletter, which has about 300 people at the moment. If you guys would like to be part of it, please let me know. We just give a brief update of what's been happening and it's been really well received. We've also got lots of neighbours, regional councils that are watching, going, how's this going to work? We're not sure. And we see it as one of our roles is to be communicating with them around what have we learned? What challenges? What would we have done differently? What are some of the things you need to think about early? Also, we've got a lot of landowners that aren't just in our region, but they also might have land in Bay of Plenty or Horizons or Hawke's Bay. And so how can we work together with those other councils to make sure landowners understand what to do when this happens? We're also developing a comms plan. So for the Waipa, at the moment, a letter and an email has gone out to those farmers telling them, hey, farm plans are here. This is what you can do. We have also updated our website to provide a lot of information. We, again, went, what do we need out of a website? Let's ask the people who actually use our website what they want and how they want it. And we have taken that feedback on board and updated our site because there is a lot of great information on our website, but it can be quite hard to find. And those symbols on there are just some of the array of people we have talked to. Next slide, please. So hopefully you know that we're having an implementation workshop on the 29th of August to walk you through the system, to showcase the different pathways that landowners can take when developing a farm. So we're going to show you a dairy farmer that has a tiaki plan and what does that mean for them. We're going to show you a dry stock farmer who has used a DIY digital tool to develop a freshwater farm plan. And we're going to show you what Zespri is doing to support their growers, to show you that it's just not a one-size-fits-all model. So if you've got any questions or things you'd like covered in that workshop, please get in touch. Really keen for it to be something that is useful for you. I guess the other thing is, while this is about farm plan implementation, we know that NCAP's getting a lot of attention in the media at the moment, and so wanted to let you know that my team and the rural compliance team are working together to work out how can we get more farmers reporting talking to Balance and Ravensdown around what messaging we can put out. And also the few farmers who are over their cap, what can we do to raise awareness with them? That's my presentation. Questions?
Excellent, thank you. Questions, any questions from the floor? Ben?
Oh, yes, the catchment context challenges and values.
Yep.
That will overlay the freshwater farm plan regulations, will it?
Yes.
So it will add additional responsibilities to farmers?
It will, when farmers are thinking about the risks and their actions, they will use that document as a guide. So if you're in an area where sediment is a issue, you will do something about sediment in your plan.
Okay, and so you've got a draft of that already?
We do have a draft.
Can
Yes.
you show us that overlaid in the workshop when you get to the
Definitely.
29th?
Yes.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, my question is, I actually had a couple of phone calls on the weekend about farm plans and why the template isn't there with Fonterra and everybody else, that there's one, that farmers can do one template to do everything. And it's just, it's going to become bigger and bigger question over the next 2 years while this is rolled out. That's what they're asking for. It really doesn't matter what it costs. That's what they want. And all of industry's got to get behind them, or else there'll be a lot of non-compliance is the issue. So I think that's a serious thing you've got to take on board, is they want a one input there, the data gets shared to wherever it needs to go, and the system is complete with one amount of data, not filling in 10 different forms. So that's not anything, you brought it up, but I just want to share the importance of that.
Yep.
Happening. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that is why we're trying to stay away from this one template, because a lot of farmers that already have plans, we want to build on that. We don't want them to start on scratch. But again, we don't want farmers who say have a Tiaki plan to then have to go and double up on things. And so that is why we, in the background with our IT people, are making sure that the different systems work together and working with Fonterra and others to see how the plans align.
I understand that, but what I'm more talking about is that you put something on the cloud and then you just push share to who you need it to go to. That's what they're asking for. Anyway.
Yep, thank you.
Good, thank you, Robbie. Right, that's that. Thank you, Tracy. I'll have a mover, please, to move the receive the report. Thank you, Pamela. Second by Robbie. All in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And welcome, Pamela. Okay, up next, we'll just farmland cover and intensity changes in the Waikato region, 2008-2018. Hayden Jones.
And Mike, if I can just,
Thank you.
I'll just premise this so that the councillors will be aware that one of the things that the committee wanted to do over the course of this year and next year was to progressively go through the various chapters that are in the State of the Environment report, so you can have a little bit of a bigger dive into the different chapters. Normally we would bring 2 chapters to you at each of the meetings. Today we have one of those chapters, and Hayden's going to go through that, which is the land use cover chapter. The other paper in that topic is to respond to a request from full council that this committee bring back recommendations how to progress some of the conversation that you had as a full council around the State of the Environment report, and full council asked this committee to come back with some recommendations about how to progress that. And so rather than having a second topic from the State of Environment today, the second element will be led by Mike, which is really leading that conversation, Mike and Thomas actually, leading that conversation to progress that direction from full council to this committee. So with that, over to you, Hayden.
Thank you, Brent. Kia ora koutou. Morning, councillors. I'll take my report as read, but I do have a presentation that I'd like to run through with you. you. So today, presenting on a piece of work we had undertaken around looking at pastoral land cover and intensity changes in the period 2001 to 2018. Next slide, please. Pastoral land cover or use is significant for our region. It represents around 1.3 million hectares as at 2018, and that accounts for around 53% of our regional land area. There's been general awareness that there was some quite significant land use change occurred in the first decade of the 2000s, particularly in the upper Waikato, with large areas of land being converted from pine forest to pasture, and possibly also general idea of intensification of land use occurring around the region. Where land use is intensified in terms of pastoral land use, involving more cattle per area of land, and that together with requiring greater nutrient inputs, more intensive management, can lead to greater pressures on waterways, streams, freshwater resources, as well as soil quality. So this work was a spatial analysis of pastoral land cover and intensity change. It was undertaken by Reese Hill and Dan Borman, the authors of the technical report, which has been published. Reese Hill's a contractor trading as Land Systems. Dan Borman is a spatial analyst in Spatial Information Section. And some of the key findings from that report were incorporated in the recent State of the Environment report. Next slide, please. But this analysis essentially informs two main measures or metrics. One is around describing pastoral land cover change, that's specifically to or from planted forest, and also describing pastoral land intensity change. The analysis or the method uses two main data sets. One is the New Zealand Land Cover Database, LCDB, and the most recent version of that is version 5. And that provides information on the distribution of grassland or pasture cover and planted forest cover. It also uses Agribase, Assure Qualities data set that provides stock unit information, stock density information, and farm information. And so the approach determines a stock unit density. So we're talking about numbers of livestock expressed in standardized units to account for differences between different types and classes of livestock per unit area of land, per hectare. And it's looked at change in those two metrics over 4 periods, essentially, three individual time periods, 2001 to 2008, 2008 to 2012, and 2012 to 2018, and then the overall period as well as the fourth category there, 2001 to 2018. Next slide, please. So a little around how the methodology works. Stock unit density classes were defined and assigned to or described as farm type classes. So these are given in the table on the left there. So that, for example, if a property had a stock unit density of, say, 8, then that would be classed and described as a sheep farm. Whereas if it had a stock unit density of 18, then that would fall into the mid-range of dairy farms category. Yeah. Pastoral intensity change is determined by the degree or amount of changes in between those stock unit classes. So, for example, if we started off with a planted forest, which is assumed to have zero stock density, if at one point in time, and if that changed to say a sheep farm, then that would be a one class change. That would be described as moderate intensification. These intensification sort of groups or classes are in the table on the right there. Whereas if a planted forest changed to a mid-range dairy farms property, then that would be more than a two-class shift, so it'd be described as a major intensification. Next slide, please. So here's presented a matrix which really gives the full range of possible intensification shifts between stock unit classes. And you can see that it also describes de-intensification or de-stocking. So for instance, if a mid-range dairy farm in 2001 became a planted forest in 2008, then that would be classed as a major de-stocking. That's just to give an idea of how these changes are described. Next slide, please. So to the main findings. The analysis showed that there was a net change in pastoral land area between 2001 and 2018 of around 41,000 hectares. And in looking at the individual time steps, that also suggests that most of that net increase in pastoral land, so net increase in that, you know, some areas went to pastoral land, other areas went to forest, but on balance and net, most of that change actually occurred prior to 2012. So in the earlier part of that time series. Next click, please.
I was going to say, that seems to me the most significant part of this is that most of the change happened 10 years ago or more, and not experiencing that change now. Correct?
Well, certainly, so this analysis goes up to 2018, but more recent stock information from the agricultural production census, which was came out for 2022 recently, does suggest that the likes of dairy cattle numbers have decreased. Beef cattle numbers have increased a little since 2018, but yes, it would seem that well, further along in the presentation, we'll talk about net intensification, but yeah, much of the change in the earlier period, then tailing off in intensification where it sort of plateaued through to 2018. And at a next update, yeah, we may see, that sort of trend continuing based on the more recent stock numbers we've got about.
And you're unlikely to get more forestry to farmland given the low water allocation availability that we've just seen in the previous.
Some of that may be possible, and so yeah, essentially I can't predict too much of what the next update might show. That this analysis can be updated at the next release of the land cover database. Date for that's uncertain at this stage, but it should be. It is coming towards the end of that period. It's due for an update, but yeah, shifts either way should be picked up and described.
Yeah, it's just in terms of the state environment report, a lot of this is historical rather than current, what we're dealing with now.
In terms of this analysis, yeah. Best available information. But yeah, I note further on the presentation as well that yes, this approach is dependent on the land cover database, which roughly comes out 5 yearly, and as I say, it's coming towards the end of a 5-year period since the last one.
Okay, Bruce.
Yeah, so that my question really, Mr. Chair, through the chair, is about land cover database, because it seems to me that you essentially so reliant on LCDB and the uncertainty around the timing, and knowing that I'm assuming that you've actually got imagery for the region, which is more up to date than LCDB. And so the question is, what are we doing regionally to foreshadow this change in answer to Ben's question? Because if we just sort of sit and wait for LCDB, there is an enormous amount of uncertainty. And in fact, we probably have the tools to be projecting ahead of the data that's being presented on that table.
I certainly agree that land cover database is an underpinning data set that's important for a lot of environmental monitoring work. The custodians of that data set is Manaki Whenua, Land Care Research, and the updates of that to date, they've been funded through various central government consortia, central government agencies getting together to bring the funding together to essentially pay for an update of that data set. And discussions have been going on with central government agencies to look to fund LCDB 6, the next iteration. But yeah, I think, I guess one of the challenges has been that even though it's recognised as a very important data set, there hasn't been that regular funding from a national level place there to ensure that regular update without a behind the scenes. It's a major undertaking to do an update of that analysis, a full description of the land cover, certainly across New Zealand, but even regionally. It's a major job requiring specialist analysis of the satellite imagery, which requires special skills and so forth as well, and computing power. So it would be no small task to look to do something independently of the national data set.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just, but actually the tenuous nature of the funding has been around with us for more than 2 decades. So Manaki Whenua is dependent on people like MFE and all the other central government agencies, and they are extremely poor at continuity of environmental data. The Parliamentary Commissioner of the Environment has written screeds about this problem, literally screeds. It also applies to our dependence on the Tier 1 monitoring, Tier 2 monitoring, Tier 3 monitoring, or State of the Environment report. This is another tenuous problem because the word on the street in Wellington is that the funding for Tier 1 is pretty well gone, and Auckland Council recently has been making contact to Crown Research Institutes in the Waikato about finding alternative ways of understanding state of the environment, information relevant to the existing Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 process. I think we could over-exaggerate how big a task it would be to do some, even if we didn't do the whole region, whether we could look at particular places where we have a sense of where significant change is occurring and using the most up-to-date imagery ourselves to get some answers here. Because look, the point I'm trying to make here is that this is simply going to be going on like this forever, I believe. Total reliance on funding for an update of the land cover database. So, yeah, I'm just making the comment really about, I think we're going to have to be a bit more focused and nimble about finding some local solutions, because I don't believe this is going to go away anytime soon.
Thank you, Bruce. Pamela?
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really want to echo what Bruce is calling for. I was just this morning at the Trade and Industrial Waters Conference, and one of the speakers there was talking about how we do not have an effective and reliable national database of land use. And so certainly would like to see this council advocate that information is really imperative in our work and our decision making, particularly when, if we're looking at 2018 and we're talking about pastoral land and farming practices. Anybody who's been involved in dairying knows that things have fundamentally shifted since 2018. And so it's difficult to make our decisions, make robust, solid decisions when we're talking about 5-year-old data. I suppose that the other question I would have is, I know this is specifically about pastoral land, but do we have any sense of, since 2001, how much pastoral land has been converted into urban development? I think that, 2001 to now is kind of the whole time I've been in New Zealand, and I've seen dramatic shifts, particularly in the Waikato constituency between, and Hamilton as well, just around growth. And so would be really interesting to consider that in terms of the bigger picture, because we all know that with urban intensification, and covering previously permeable soils with asphalt and relying on stormwater systems that may or may not be able to effectively contain or mitigate some of the contamination issues. It all contributes. So would really like to see some of that data alongside this data so we can take that into consideration. Kia ora. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. If we could capture all that, be great.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that point that I'm reluctant to have a report that is so historical and we have to make current decisions on it when the period's changed. So even if we have a 5-page summary from staff on what's happened since 2018 to now, because you've got some data there. You talked about the cow, the stock numbers have declined. There must be mapping we've got about where there is new forestry. So we've got GIS systems that can provide, as Bruce said, an overview of areas where I think there's been change. So it doesn't have to be a year-long report, by external consultants. It's really just an update from staff on what they think the changes have been or are likely to be.
So there are more recent stock number information, but I guess what's missing is the spatial distribution around that, and being able to analyse and describe that in a consistent way from a very sound and well-established data set like the LCDB. There is a limitation around going beyond just making some inferences from recent livestock numbers, which are aspatial, unfortunately.
I think what we're hearing clearly is obviously the work that Hayden's presenting is the backcasting state of the environment data that we've got. And I think what the councillors are saying is when they're doing their policy development process, which is coming up very shortly, what is the most current data that can be put in front of them to support that policy decision making? It's great to see the stuff that's happened up to 2018, but what's the stuff over the last 5 years? And it looks like you were about to make a comment, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment in relation to, I guess, we as council putting in place policies to control the use of land as it affects freshwater. So the information presented here, particularly for the older time periods, and the changes we saw, particularly in the Upper Waikato over the early 2000s, was a fundamental driver of Plan Change 1, because our council has had quite a permissive policy framework when it comes to land use change and land use intensification. And this sort of information was really valuable in helping us understand that there was significant intensification happening that our regional plan wasn't set up to deal with appropriately. And as a result, Plan Change 1 was put in place. So I think there's, from a policy perspective, we do look at the changing pressures. We use our water quality, state of the environment information as well to help us understand how pressures are changing. Really do value the comments councillors have made, and I think it segues really nicely into the conversation to follow with Thomas about how you would like us to follow on from the SOE reporting and what additional information we should be presenting. I just wanted to highlight that this information, as Hayden's presented it, said in a very robust methodology, spatially resolved, actually is really valuable to confirm that the policy direction we're taking.
I agree, but we want something for now looking forward, and I'd like some kind of data on that, even if it's a best guess. So we've got decisions to make. We can't rely upon something that happened in 2008, which is effective.
I think that's the point Mike's making, though, but because any land use change now has to go through a regulatory process, so we know straight away.
All I'm saying is, where's the report that shows us that? That's all. Pulling together the information subsequent.
Right, I think Hayden will show a really good example of how policy has contributed to significant changes in Taupo water management unit. So, sorry, I'll let Hayden carry on. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, please. Right, speaking of the changes spatially, this map shows the change in cover between planted forest and pastoral lands. The red areas were in pasture in 2001 and then, we're in forest in 2001, then in pasture in 2018. And the sort of bluish light purple areas were in pasture in 2001 and forest in 2018. Next click, please. So that the map does highlight that there was a lot of that change in pastoral cover occurred in the upper Waikato. Some very large areas of red in that zone, really reflecting that pine to pasture conversion that happened in the early 2000s through to 2012. Next click, please. Then in the Lake Taupo zone, a little hard to see with the colours there, but there are some reasonably large areas of the light purplish coloured polygons, which indicate that change back from pasture to forest. And as Mike was mentioning, I think that reflects that afforestation that appears to have occurred in response to policy changes in that zone around managing nitrogen in Lake Taupo catchment. So it's picking up that impact of that policy. Another point that came out from the results was that 41% of the net increase in pastoral land actually occurred on land use capability class 6. So these classes describe the suitability of different types of land to sustain various types of productive use. Pastoral land use is considered suitable on classes 1 to 7. So class 6 is at the lower end of that suitability range for pastoral use. So one point that coming from the work is a little bit worrying in that it appears that intensification of use has shifted onto some of that steeper country that is not that well suited at sustaining intensive pastoral use. Next slide, please. So in terms of pastoral intensity change, it was estimated that around 504,000 hectares, 40% of pastoral land underwent some intensification, so that's either moderate or major intensification, whereas almost 281,000 hectares underwent some destocking, de-intensification, leaving a net intensification on 17% of pastoral land over that period, 2001 to 2018. Next click, please. So the highlighted area in the table there, again, suggesting that much of that intensification actually occurred earlier on in the period, 2001 to 2008. Between moderate and major intensification, those areas sum to around 400,000 hectares, whereas in the next time period down, the two values sum to around 200,000 hectares, so half as much. Next slide, please. This map showing the distribution of that intensity change. Next click, please. The red areas indicating major intensification. So again, concentration of some quite large land areas in the upper Waikato catchment management zone, reflective of what we saw with the pastoral land cover change and that pine to pasture conversion. And in fact, in that zone, around 54% of the pastoral area intensification during that period. And again, next click, please. Yeah, so the results indicate substantial areas of destocking in the Lake Taupo. Net intensification was largest during the 2001 to 2008 period, so the first part of the time series, for several management zones. Next slide, please. Next click. Yeah, click, please. Yeah, so that's highlighted there for a number of zones, not just Upper Waikato, but also Piako, Waipa, Lower Waikato. Between 2001 and 2008, substantial net intensification. But after that time, for most zones, that dropped away substantially. So the light green is 2001 to 2008. Darker green for the subsequent periods. Held up a little bit in Upper Waikato, perhaps still some of that pine to pasture conversion occurring through to 2012. But yeah, a big shift after 2008. Next slide, please. So yeah, discussing some of the limitations of the approach that we've already canvassed in the discussion here around the reliance on LCDB and the timing of updates of that. But yeah, at this point in time, it is, I guess, a key data set in terms of providing us that distribution and change in land cover. Also, many data sets will have limitations and shortcomings in terms of agri-base. The authors identified that there were some missing or incomplete data. That data set, there's sort of incremental data collection over time, so it's difficult to link that to particular snapshots in time and result in some lag in information. But it's the best available data in terms of that stock unit, deriving that stock unit density. And the authors felt that those limitations were fairly minor. Next slide, please. The authors identified several points of further work that would be useful to undertake. One of which was repeating the analysis with on the release of LCDB 6, get latest snapshot. Also suggests that a re-evaluation of the farm type classes with latest data around the distribution of stock density classes may be useful, although they did test the current classes against recent beef and lamb and dairy NZ data, and the classes appeared appropriate at this stage. Suggestion of considering other forms of intensification, building that into the analysis. So for instance, change from pastoral use to arable use, cropping. And also they suggest taking a quantitative look at the links between pastoral intensification and changes in, measured changes in water quality and soil quality, which would be substantial analysis. Next slide, please. So in summary, we've had a spatial approach developed. It has described land cover and intensity changes or pastoral changes over this time period. Seen a net increase in pastoral land, about 40,000 hectares, net pastoral intensification, more than 223,000 hectares over that time, but much of that change occurring prior to 2012. And this certainly appears to reflect and coincide with we know of the timing of the pine to pasture conversions in the upper Waikato. So that significant driver of the changes that's observed. Thank you.
Right, any questions? Follow on? Yes, Ben.
I was just going to ask Bruce, in terms of the, Bruce.
This is for you, Bruce.
I was going to ask you, in terms of the mapping that we showed there, the map that showed the intensification up in the upper, is that the kind of mapping you're talking about that we can update regionally rather than have to put up on the national survey?
What I'm interested in, because we do have other data sets within the council, and we heard about some of those, every time somebody applies to do something, got the data. And it's a question of how you translate that data into a spatial expression. What we're doing here is waiting for LCDB to provide us with the spatial expression 5 years too late.
Yeah.
What I want to know is how we take the other sorts of data that we're collecting, convert it into a spatial expression, and give us a current understanding of what's going on in our region so that we can make better decisions, Ben. I think we're both on the same wavelength.
Yeah. And so it was just to clarify that should be possible.
So have we taken that in, gentlemen? We could have some feedback on that, perhaps down the track.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
Sorry, through you, Chair. I just highlight, I absolutely agree with Bruce is saying about the wealth of information that we do collect, and Brent's directorate captures a lot of that really, really valuable, what I would call pressure level data. So what are the pressures on the environment through water takes, through discharge consents? I think that's an area where we could do a lot more and do a lot better capture of that data in a state of the environment sense. We don't do that well at the moment, but we could certainly do that better.
The lag that we're worried about. Bruce, did you have anything?
No, we're on the same wavelength.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Could we have someone move the report, please? Thank you, Robbie. Seconded, Pamela. All in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, gentlemen. And 10-minute break, everyone? Yep. Before the next item? Okay, so we'll adjourn for 10 minutes, coming back in at 12:10 on time. Thank you.